The empty chair legacy. The silence lasted exactly 4 heartbeats. Then Sarah Martinez looked directly at Steve Harvey and said the words that would stop Family Feud mid-show and change everyone in that studio forever. How to be brave when you're scared. Steve's microphone slipped slightly in his hand. The audience, moments before buzzing with energy, fell completely quiet. Even the Rodriguez family, their competitors, stopped celebrating their previous answer and turned to look at the 18-year-old girl standing at the podium with tears streaming down her face. But this story doesn't start with Sarah's answer. It starts 6 months earlier, in a hospital room in Phoenix, Arizona, where an 82-year-old man named Miguel Martinez was having the most important conversation of his granddaughter's life. Miguel had been fighting lung cancer for 14 months. The treatments had been brutal, stealing his energy, his appetite, his thick gray hair that Sarah had loved to braid when she was little. But they couldn't steal his spirit, his humor, or his absolute devotion to the granddaughter who had been his constant companion since the day she was born. Sarah's parents had died in a car accident when she was 6 months old. Miguel and his wife Carmen had taken her in without question, raising her as if she were their own daughter. When Carmen passed away from a heart attack when Sarah was 12, grandfather and granddaughter had formed an even closer bond, taking care of each other in the way that only people who have shared real loss can do. Every evening at 7 o'clock, they had their ritual. Homework finished, dinner cleaned up. They would settle into Miguel's worn leather recliner, the big one that could fit both of them if Sarah curled up just right. And they would watch Family Feud together. Mija, Miguel had whispered that last day in the hospital, his voice weak but determined. If you ever get on that show, you save me a seat. The one right in the front row where I can see everything, because I'll be there watching, even if nobody else can see me. Sarah had laughed then, the kind of laugh people use when someone they love says something both beautiful and impossible. She had been holding his hand, feeling how thin his fingers had become, how the calluses from 40 years of teaching had softened during his months of illness. "Grandpa, we're going to get on that show together," she had insisted. "You, me, Mom, Rosa, Uncle Carlos, Aunt Maria, we're going to win the fast money round and take home $20,000 and use it for your medical bills." Miguel had smiled at her optimism, but his eyes held the sad wisdom of someone who knew his story was ending while hers was just beginning. "Promise me," he had said, his voice growing urgent. "Promise me you'll save me that set." "I promise, Grandpa. But you're going to be sitting in it yourself." They were supposed to audition for Family Feud together. It was their dream, their shared obsession. Miguel had filled out the Family Feud application himself, his handwriting shaky from the chemotherapy but still legible. Under "Why should your family be chosen?" he had written, "Because my granddaughter Sarah has been my partner for 18 years, and we've been practicing for this show since she could talk. We know how to work as a team, and we know how to love each other through anything life throws at us. We've survived loss, illness, and uncertainty together. And we've learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about showing up for each other every single day." The call came 3 weeks after his funeral. Sarah almost didn't answer. She was still living in that strange hollow space that grief creates, where ordinary things like television shows and game shows feel impossibly distant from the reality of loss. She was staying with her Aunt Rosa, sleeping in what had been her childhood bedroom, trying to figure out how to be 18 and alone in the world. But something made her pick up the phone that Tuesday afternoon in October. Maybe it was muscle memory. She had been answering Miguel's phone for months during his illness. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just chance. "Is this Sarah Martinez? This is Julie from Family Feud casting. We'd like to invite your family to compete on Family Feud." Sarah had stood in Rosa's kitchen, holding the phone, feeling the weight of a promise she had made to a man who was no longer there to see it fulfilled. The producer had been kind when Sarah explained the situation. They offered to put the family on a waiting list, to give them more time to process their loss. But Rosa had insisted they keep the date. "Papa would never forgive us if we gave up his spot," she had said, and everyone knew she was right. So here they were, the Martinez family from Phoenix, Arizona. Sarah, 18, a college freshman studying to be a teacher like her grandfather had been. Rosa, Miguel's daughter-in-law, 45, who worked 2 jobs at a medical office and a department store, and somehow still managed to cook dinner every night and check Sarah's homework. Carlos, Miguel's youngest son, 38, a mechanic who had driven 8 hours from Tucson to be there. Maria, Miguel's eldest daughter, 51, who had flown in from Denver where she worked as a nurse. And Alex, Rosa's youngest son and Sarah's 15-year-old cousin, who looked so much like Miguel had at that age that sometimes Sarah had to catch her breath when she looked at him. But there was something different about this family lineup. Something that everyone in the studio could feel, but couldn't quite identify. An emptiness that seemed to pull at the edges of their joy, making their laughter sound slightly hollow. Their smiles seemed brave rather than carefree. During the family introduction segment, they had gathered around Steve Harvey with the nervous energy that all families brought to the show. But underneath the excitement was something else, a careful tenderness with each other, the way people behave when they're still learning how to be a family reconfigured by loss. Steve Harvey had noticed it during the introductions. He'd been hosting Family Feud long enough to recognize when families carried weight beyond the normal nervousness of being on television. There was something in the way they stood close together, the way they looked at each other for reassurance, that suggested recent loss. And we have the Martinez family from Phoenix, Arizona, Steve had announced with his usual enthusiasm. Tell me about your family, Rosa. Rosa had stepped forward, her voice steady but soft. We're here to represent our family patriarch, Miguel Martinez, who taught us that family isn't just about sharing the same name. It's about showing up for each other, especially when times get hard. Steve had looked puzzled for just a moment. Present tense, past tense, the subtle grammar of grief was something he'd learned to recognize over years of talking to thousands of families. But he hadn't pushed, not then. Some stories reveal themselves when they're ready. And Sarah, Steve had continued, turning to the youngest member of the team. What did your grandfather teach you? Sarah had looked directly into the camera. And for a moment, she wasn't talking to Steve or the studio audience. She was talking to Miguel. He taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid, she had said. It's about doing what you need to do even when you are afraid. And he taught me that love doesn't end just because someone isn't here anymore. The game had started normally after that. The Rodriguez family from San Antonio was energetic and funny, the kind of family that made great television. They'd taken an early lead with some solid answers to questions about household chores and vacation destinations. Steve was in his element, working the crowd, making his signature faces at unexpected responses, creating those moments of connection that made Family Feud more than just a game show. But during the 4th round, everything changed. The category was Name Something a Grandfather Teaches His Grandchildren. It should have been an easy question, the kind of heartwarming topic that brought out sweet, simple answers. The Rodriguez family had just played their turn, with answers like how to fish, how to drive, and how to be respectful. Standard grandfather wisdom, the kind of lessons that made audiences smile and nod in recognition. Sarah was at the podium for the Martinez family. Steve had noticed earlier that she seemed mature for 18, carrying herself with the kind of poise that usually comes from experience with responsibility. Now, facing this particular question, something in her expression shifted entirely. She wasn't just a contestant anymore. She was a granddaughter missing someone who should have been standing right behind her, cheering her on, whispering encouragement in her ear. Sarah, Steve said, for the points your family needs, name something a grandfather teaches his grandchildren. Sarah closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them, she wasn't looking at Steve. She was looking at a specific seat in the front row of the audience. The 3rd seat from the left, which had been empty since they'd been seated for the taping. How to be brave when you're scared, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying clearly across the entire studio. The words hung in the air, like a prayer. Steve's expression changed completely. The entertainer's mask slipped away, and suddenly he wasn't a game show host anymore. He was a grandfather himself, a father, a man who understood that some answers come from places too deep for game shows to reach. "Sarah," he said gently, taking a step closer to her podium. "That's a beautiful answer, sweetheart. That's not just an answer, that's wisdom." The board revealed that it wasn't there. The survey hadn't captured an answer that profound, that personal, true, but something in the studio had shifted. The audience wasn't focusing on points anymore. The Rodriguez family wasn't thinking about winning. Everyone was looking at Sarah, who was crying openly now, and at the empty seat she kept glancing toward. "Tell me about him," Steve said, and it wasn't a request from a host to a contestant. It was an invitation from one human being to another. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "My grandpa, Miguel. He died 6 months ago. Lung cancer. We were supposed to be here together. We applied as a team, and when they called," her voice broke, "when they called to accept us, he was already gone." Steve set his cards down on the podium and walked closer to Sarah. Behind him, the control room producers were making frantic hand gestures, but Steve wasn't looking at them. He was looking at a teenage girl who was carrying the weight of representing someone who couldn't represent himself. "Where was he supposed to sit?" Steve asked. Sarah pointed to the empty seat in the front row. "Right there. He made me promise that if we ever got picked, I'd save him the seat with the best view. He said he'd find a way to be there, even if—" She couldn't finish the sentence. That's when Steve Harvey did something unprecedented in the history of Family Feud. He walked down off the stage, into the audience, and stood in front of that empty seat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying across the studio with unusual gravity. "I everyone in this studio to understand something. This seat isn't empty. This is Miguel Martinez's seat. And he is here." Steve turned to face Sarah. "Your grandpa taught you how to be brave when you're scared. And you know how I know that? Because you're standing on that stage right now, representing your family, carrying his memory even though your heart is breaking. That's not just brave, sweetheart. That's heroic." The audience began to stand. Not because they were prompted to, not because of any cue cards or director's signals. They stood because they recognized something sacred happening in front of them, something that transcended television and game shows and entertainment. Steve walked back to Sarah, and when he reached her, he did something that broke every protocol in television production. He took off his suit jacket, the navy blue jacket that had become as much a part of his television persona as his mustache and his smile, and he draped it gently around Sarah's shoulders. "This jacket has been with me for every show, every family, every moment of joy and heartbreak and lather that's happened on this stage," he said. "And I want your grandpa's granddaughter to have it, because you just honored his memory in the most beautiful way possible." Sarah, now wrapped in Steve's oversized jacket, looked small and young and incredibly strong all at the same time. She turned toward Miguel's empty seat and spoke directly to it. "I kept my promise, Grandpa. I saved you the best seat in the house." But Steve wasn't finished. He turned to the Rodriguez family, who had been watching this unfold with tears in their own eyes. "Rodriguez family," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Would it be all right with you if we called this game a tie? If both families won today?" Carlos Rodriguez, the patriarch of the competing family, didn't hesitate for even a second. "Steve, that would be an honor." What happened next had never occurred in the history of Family Feud. Both families walked to center stage together. The Martinez family and the Rodriguez family stood side by side, united not by competition but by the recognition of something more important than winning. The honoring of memory, the celebration of family, the acknowledgement that love transcends even death. Steve addressed the studio and the cameras directly. "Today we learned something more important than any survey could teach us. We learned that the most important lessons don't come from books or schools. They come from the people who love us enough to teach us how to be brave when we're scared. The episode aired exactly as it happened, unedited, 3 months later. It became the highest-rated Family Feud episode in the show's history, not because of any game show drama, but because viewers recognized something authentic in a world that often feels manufactured. More importantly, it started a tradition. Family Feud began dedicating one seat at every taping to the memory of family members who couldn't be there. They call it Miguel's seat, and it's become a place where families can feel the presence of loved ones they've lost. The moment would have lasting ripples beyond that single taping. Within weeks of the episode airing, the Family Feud studios received thousands of letters from viewers sharing their own stories of loss, of promises kept to grandparents, parents, and loved ones who had passed away. Each letter was a testament to the universal truth that Sarah had spoken, that love transcends death, and that the greatest lessons come from those who teach us how to be brave when we're scared. Steve Harvey, who had hosted thousands of episodes and met tens of thousands of contestants, said later that Sarah and her family had taught him something he never expected to learn on a game show set. "I thought my job was to entertain people," he reflected in interviews months later. "But that day, I learned that sometimes entertainment becomes something bigger. Sometimes it becomes healing." The jacket that Steve gave Sarah became more than a garment. It became a symbol of connection across generations, a tangible reminder that love finds ways to wrap around us even when the people we love can no longer be physically present. Sarah wore it to every important moment in her college years, to her freshman orientation, to her first teaching practicum, to the day she received her degree in elementary education. But perhaps the most powerful moment came 2 years later, when Sarah was student teaching at Miguel Martinez Elementary School, a school that had been renamed in her grandfather's honor after his 40-year career as an educator. Standing in front of a classroom of third graders wearing Steve's jacket over her professional attire, Sarah taught her first lesson about courage. "Who can tell me what it means to be brave?" she asked her students. Small boy in the front row raised his hand. "Is it when you're not scared of anything?" Sarah smiled, remembering another classroom, another teacher, another time when this same question had been posed by a grandfather who understood that the most important lessons can't be found in textbooks. "Being brave," Sarah said, "isn't about not being scared. Being brave is about doing what you need to do, even when you are scared. It's about keeping promises to people you love. It's about showing up for your family. It's about honoring the people who taught you how to face the world with courage." The students listened with the kind of attention that children reserve for stories that feel like truth. "I had a grandfather who taught me that," Sarah continued. "And even though he can't be here with me anymore, every time I'm scared or worried or unsure, I remember what he taught me. That love doesn't end, that lessons live on, that the people who matter most to us are never really gone as long as we carry their wisdom in our hearts." Sarah Martinez finished her college education and is now in her second year of teaching elementary school, following in Miguel's footsteps with a determination and grace that would have made him proud beyond measure. She teaches at Miguel Martinez Elementary School, the institution that was renamed in her grandfather's honor, after his distinguished 40-year career as an educator who shaped thousands of young lives across 4 decades of dedicated service. She still has Steve's jacket, carefully preserved and only worn on the most meaningful occasions. It hangs in her bedroom closet, protected by a garment bag, but she takes it out for special moments, graduation ceremonies, the anniversary of Miguel's passing, and whenever she needs to feel connected to that day, when her grandfather's presence filled an empty chair and reminded everyone watching that love truly has no boundaries. The card Steve gave her that day with his personal number is framed in her apartment next to a photo of her and Miguel from her high school graduation. She's never had to use the number, but knowing it's there has provided a sense of security and connection that extends far beyond their initial meeting. The connection they formed that day has grown into a mentorship that encompasses both personal guidance and professional development. A relationship that extends far beyond a single moment of television magic. The Martinez family has become part of an extended Family Feud family that includes not just Steve Harvey himself, but the Rodriguez family, who have remained close friends and regular visitors, and dozens of other families who were touched by their story and reached out to share their own experiences of loss and love, and the particular kind of courage required to honor both grief and joy simultaneously. Every year on the anniversary of Miguel's death, Sarah gets a text message from Steve Harvey that arrives exactly at 7:00 p.m., the time when she and her grandfather used to watch Family Feud together. It always says the same thing: your grandpa would be proud. Keep being brave. And every year, Sarah responds with a photo. Sometimes of herself in a classroom full of smiling children. Sometimes of a family gathering, where Miguel's spirit seems to hover over the celebration, always of moments that show a life being lived with the kind of courage and purpose that Miguel Martinez had spent 18 years teaching her to possess. The empty seat tradition at Family Feud has touched thousands of families since that transformative day in October. Miguel's seat has become something far greater than a symbolic gesture. It has evolved into a sacred space where love transcends physical absence, where families can feel the presence of those they've lost, where the bonds between generations are honored and celebrated rather than simply mourned, and where the continuation of love beyond death becomes a tangible reality that everyone in the studio can witness and experience. The empty seat in the Family Feud audience is never really empty. It's filled with memory, with love, with the understanding that the most important things we inherit from our families aren't material possessions, but lessons about courage, about showing up for one another, about being brave when we're scared. It's filled with the presence of grandparents and parents and siblings and friends who taught us how to love deeply, how to laugh freely, how to face adversity with grace and dignity, and how to carry forward the best parts of those who came before us. Miguel Martinez never got to sit in that seat in person, but his presence that day was undeniable, felt not just by his family, but by everyone who witnessed a granddaughter keeping a sacred promise to a grandfather who had taught her the most important lesson of all, that love doesn't end with death, and that sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is show up even when our hearts are breaking, even when the person we most want to share the moment with can't be there in the way we hoped. Sarah's answer never made it onto the board that day, but it made it into the hearts of millions of viewers who understood that some truths are too important for surveys, too profound for game shows, and too powerful for anything except the kind of love that lasts forever. That's what Miguel Martinez taught his granddaughter during their 18 years together. That's what she taught Steve Harvey and everyone watching. That's what they taught the world about the enduring power of love, courage, and family bonds that death cannot break. And in classrooms across the country, where Sarah Martinez and teachers like her stand before children who are learning what it means to be brave, Miguel's fundamental lesson continues to spread and multiply. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the conscious decision to love and honor and show up despite that fear, to carry forward the best lessons from those who shaped us, and to live lives worthy of the sacrifices made by those who came before us. That's the legacy of an empty chair that was never really empty at all. The ripple effects of that single afternoon continue to spread, touching lives in ways that Miguel Martinez could never have imagined when he made his granddaughter promise to save him a seat. Letters still arrive at the Family Feud studios from viewers who watched Sarah's episode and felt inspired to have difficult conversations with their own families about love, loss, and legacy. Grandparents write about how the episode prompted them to share family stories they had been keeping to themselves. Parents describe how they began talking more openly with their children about the importance of courage in the face of fear. The episode has been studied in communication courses as an example of authentic television, in grief counseling programs, as a demonstration of how public spaces can become places of healing, and in education classes as a teaching tool about the lasting impact of mentorship across generations. But more importantly than any academic analysis, it continues to serve its original purpose, reminding people that love transcends every boundary, including the most seemingly final one of all. Today, when Sarah Martinez stands in front of her third-grade classroom, wearing a cardigan instead of Steve Harvey's suit jacket, she carries forward not just her grandfather's lessons about education and dedication, but also the profound truth she learned on a game show stage, that the people we love never really leave us. They live on in the courage we find when we're scared, in the promises we keep when keeping them seems impossible, and in the love we share with others who need to know that they are not alone. That's Miguel Martinez's true legacy, not just the granddaughter he raised with love and wisdom, or the thousands of students he taught during his distinguished 40-year career as an educator, but the profound reminder to millions of people that some chairs are never truly empty, as long as love continues to fill the space where absence might otherwise live. And somewhere in Phoenix, Arizona, in a classroom full of eager young faces, his granddaughter continues to teach the lesson he taught her: how to be brave when you're scared.